Okay, let's jump right in. For this sketch, the purpose was to get right into practicing coloring. So you're going to see me start with a very loose pencil sketch. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm just trying to get down some primary perspective lines so I can move right into my pen tool and then on to my coloring as quick as possible. You might notice that I'm using a very loose grip on this pencil. I'm holding that pencil almost by the eraser. Now, I'm not going to change my grip for this sketch since I only need a few loose lines. Depending on my scene, I might try to get more detailed with this sketch, but this scene does not require it. So once I've got my sketch down, I'll switch over to my fountain pen. And the first thing you're going to see me do is plot down 2 points to connect that line. And that's just a technique that I like to do to help me draw a straighter line. Now, today I'm going to be using the Pilot Kakuno fountain pen to ink my drawing. And you'll notice that I'm going to be taking a little bit more time with the inking because I want to make sure that I have some strong, consistent lines when I switch over to my alcohol markers. One of the things you may notice too is that when I'm drawing a straight line, I'm picking up my pen several times and creating almost a dashed line. And this technique just helps me keep that line as straight as possible without having to use a straight edge. And I'm going to go ahead and just wrap up this sign by drawing the rest of this frame here. Now, something I didn't mention during the sketch phase, but when I was drawing the railing at the top, I missed my parallel and made a decision that I could probably fix it during my inking, but you'll see as I draw it that it didn't go as planned. But I'm not too worried about that because the whole point of the sketch was meant for me to practice more coloring. Also, I want to point out another mistake I made. In the corner of this building here, I actually draw the wrong corner. And you might notice that I hesitated for a moment. And what's going through my head is that I'm determining whether I want to try to correct this or just improvise. And I ended up deciding to try to fix this, and I go over and draw the correct line. Now, later on, you'll see that this actually worked out in my favor because the railing at the top here will end up hiding my error. Again, as I move over to the windows on this side of the building, you will notice that I'm picking up my pen and I'm actually doing something else that's a little interesting. I'm giving my pen a little bit of a flick, and what I'm doing is I'm continuing that motion with my pen in the direction of my line after I lift it. This is just helping me get comfortable with where my pen needs to be so that when I actually draw the line, I know my hand placement. This is similar to drawing a phantom line where I'm mimicking where I want my line to go without actually drawing it. Now, I'll continue to wrap up the details on this side of the building, and you'll notice that I'm taking my time to make sure that my lines are relatively straight. But one thing that I want to point out is I am moving my hand into a different position depending on the line that I'm drawing, and this is just going to help me make it easier to draw a straighter line. And as I move over to some of the other details, you'll notice that I'm using that dashed line technique. Okay, as I start to complete the rest of the details in the scene, you will notice that I am drawing out my shadow lines, and in my previous sketches, I would normally fill these with hatch lines. But because I want to practice my coloring, especially the coloring of shadows, I'm only drawing out the outlines of my shadows, and I will use my markers to color these in. Now I'll go ahead and wrap up the window detail here, and we'll move over to the alcohol markers. But before we get into the markers, I wanted to point out the colors in my scene. If you notice the reference image, the colors kind of feel more natural and toned down. And that's going to be different from the colors that I have in my set of markers. And when I add the yellow here, you'll notice that my yellow is much brighter than my reference photo. So I know I'll need to find a way to tone that down, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to try this scene. I wanted to practice on pushing and pulling my colors into different directions. Now, you'll notice the one thing I forgot to do is to erase my pencil lines. So you'll see me do that, and the only downside is that those pencil lines will still show up wherever I've already added my coloring. Okay, so to push that yellow closer to the color in my reference photo, I'm going to be using some different colors on top. I've got some pale pinks and some warm gray colors that I think will do the trick, and you'll see me use those to manipulate that color. And the way that I'm going to approach this is that I'm looking constantly back at my reference photo and comparing that color to my sketch. And I'm trying to see what colors appear in my reference photo that don't exist in my sketch. For example, my bright yellow lacked that warm color from my reference photo, so that tells me that I need to find some way to introduce a little bit of red or even a light brown to neutralize that color. And that's what you'll see me do over several stages. So I do like to move around in my scene, and you'll see me color other elements throughout, and I oftentimes won't finish one particular element at a time. Okay, now for the shadows. In my digital art, one of the things that I like to do is to use a deep purple or a deep blue for all of my shadows. It's a way to add more interest, I believe, and I wanted to try that technique here. And as you can see, when I color in the shadows, you can see the individual strokes that the marker is making. So I'm going to actually do this in 2 layers, and that's going to help blend those strokes together, making the color look a little more flat. At this point, I'll take a gray marker and start filling in some of the window detail. One of the things you'll see me do here in a minute is that I'll go back over the same area multiple times, and this is just to darken up that color. I'm going to move over to my sign, and I'm going to be using a combination of grays to add a few layers of shadows to the edges of my sign frame. And this is going to hopefully make it look a little more metallic. And there's a trick here that I'm doing, and that's that I'm adding a little bit of a darker shade toward the edges or corners of my sign frames. I'm doing this especially where my 2 signs meet. Okay, now I'll go ahead and finish up the shadows on the building side. And again, I'm using that same color marker to add my shadows, and I'll use the same color for the shadow underneath my signs. And I'm also going to use that shadow color to add some shadows to each of the windows and ledges, and I'll do it again up by the roof line just to give the building a little more dimension. Now, I'm about to make a mistake here that I thought I could get away with, but I wanted to add some implied lettering to my sign, so I grabbed my red marker, and once I put it down, I realized that it's way too bold, and that's when I just stopped. This is one of those mistakes that I decided it was better to let be than to fix. I was hoping the color would be a little softer, but I didn't want to push it and risk the chance at ruining my sketch. Now, the final step that I'm going to do is I'm going to add some blue to the sky. I think the blue is going to be a good contrast to that yellow and complete my scene. And again, here, you'll notice that you can see each individual stroke that my blue marker makes. So you're going to see me go over that again multiple times to help blend that together. And this is a really nice benefit of using alcohol markers. And the last thing you'll notice that I'm doing is I'm using the clear marker to go back over my sky. And the hope is that this is going to blend that color even further, but it also has the effect of lightening up my blue. As you can tell, the blue was pretty bold to begin with, but as I give it a couple coats of this clear marker, you'll start to notice that it's lightening up, and that's because I am saturating my page with more alcohol, which is pushing that color back so it's not as vibrant. And there's my final scene. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of color, and watch out for future videos as I continue to take this journey. If you haven't already, please give this a like and subscribe.